Okay, I think we're going to get things started. My name is Mark Millette. I am a school counselor at Sycamore High School. I have last names L through Z for the class of 2025. Thank you for coming out tonight. This will be like recorded, and I will be sharing slides. The slides will be up on the website as well. All right, we will try to get these up by the end of the week, as will this recording too. And I will also share contact information if there are other questions that you may have. We will do a short question and answer at the end too, but if you have questions that might be a little bit more personal and or less specific in nature, that we can take care of those after the meeting. All right. I am going to hand things off to Jeremy. I'm going to mute myself and turn on the presentation. Jeremy, let me know to move through the slides.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Great.
Well, just to introduce myself, I'm Jeremy Orndorff. I've worked at UC for about 6 years now, and I've been in financial aid for about 13 years. And it occurred to me this year that when I started right after college. It was my first post-college job. I just never left. And I had hair, and I was not gray at all. And now I have very little hair, and I'm starting to go all gray. So I don't know what that tells you, but I have done this a long time, and we're going to try to go through a lot of different information here to just kind of give you a full overlook of the process, some information that's specific to UC, but it's also going to be useful regardless of where you're looking at, because I'm sure some of you are not going to be, you'll be looking at other places besides just UC at the University of Cincinnati. So go ahead and hit me up to the next slide here, sir. And this is actually a video. Well, I don't know if that video will play. We've had some issues with that, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. So today's agenda, we're going to go over types of financial aid available, FAFSA overview, how to calculate your financial aid, cost comparisons for colleges, various resources you can use, and of course some questions and answer time at the end. Let's go on through there. So kind of start with, we get a lot of questions or reoccurring concerns. So just a few things throughout there, some myths about financial aid. The form is too hard to fill out, and I will tell you, the first FAFSA I ever did, which was for myself, as you might guess, it was a paper FAFSA, and you can still do a paper FAFSA should you want to torture yourself, and it was very difficult. You can do this online now through, obviously, as you might guess, online. There's apps for this for both iPhone and Android. It is much, much easier, much, much more streamlined than it once was. So please don't think that this is some complicated thing that you'll never be able to do. It is very much accessible for you. We can hit the next slide there. Yeah. Another common myth that we get: my child can't receive financial aid because I'm currently in school receiving financial aid for myself. And so this comes up sometimes, or maybe people will be worried if they've got 2 kids in financial aid, will the government offer them less or split something between them? And the answer is no. So, everyone who does a FAFSA, it's an individual thing, and they are looking at your family, but it's not going to negatively impact your financial aid eligibility just because you're receiving financial aid or you have multiple kids in receiving financial aid. In fact, if multiple students are enrolled at the same time and receiving financial aid, that can actually help your financial aid eligibility. So that is not a problem, and you don't need to worry about it. We go to the next slide there. So this is also very common. People say, I think my parents make too much money, or I think they'll only be eligible, won't be eligible for any kind of grant money, so I just don't want to bother with it. Why mess with it? And there is no income cutoff. Now, it is true that, at a certain level, you're eventually going to not be eligible for anything but loan money. But, sometimes people make this determination, not necessarily based on the best information. So we always suggest, at least for your first year, to do it, for a freshman year, see what you're eligible for. If you are planning to utilize federal loans, you do want to make sure you get your FAFSA completed. We'll be talking about that also here shortly. We can go to the next one there. So what is financial aid? It's a variety of funds to assist students and families pay for college. Kind of makes sense. It's there to help you cover the cost to go to school. There's kind of some assumptions with the federal government, I should say, make with the creation of FAFSA, and that is that parents and children or students share an equal responsibility for covering those costs. So this is kind of the methodology behind FAFSA. And so it's not just parents, it's not just students. They're looking at everyone. So they are going to be looking at parent and student, financial information and things like that. We'll go ahead to hit the next slide there. So the overall goals of financial aid is to assist students in paying for college. And we try to do that by evaluating a family's ability to, pay educational expenses. And then we're trying to distribute limited resources in an equitable manner as possible. And we're trying to provide a balance of gift aid and self-help aid. So again, pretty much what you'd think, we're trying to utilize the available money that's available and get it to the people who need it the most. And I'm going to go into more of those terms of gift aid and self-help aid. So we can go ahead and hit the next slide there. So there are four major types, or I should say aid falls into one of four types: grants, scholarships, work study, and federal loans. Grants and scholarships are free money. So grants are going to be based off of, generally speaking, your FAFSA information. And again, we'll be talking about FAFSA and going through that here shortly. Scholarships are normally going to be merit-based. And I'll just take a pause and say at the University of Cincinnati, our scholarships are strictly merit-based. That is not necessarily true of all universities. Sometimes they can have a combination of the two. But it's either, a combination of merit and need-based, based off your financial information, or just scholarship, or just merit-based. Work study is money that you can earn with a job through a campus, through university. And so that's going to be very much like a traditional job, but you're earning money with that. It's not free money. It is money that it would fall into that self-help aid side of things. Federal loans are very much what it sounds like. They are loans offered by the federal government to students or parents to cover the cost of the expense of going to school. And so those are repaid. And again, that would kind of fall under that self-help aid. You're expected to repay that money, just like with federal work study, you're expected to be earning money with that. This is not an all-encompassing list of grants. This is some of the big ones out there: Federal Pell Grant, Federal Supplemental Opportunity Grant, Teach Grant, and Ohio College Opportunity Grant. So these are all, some of these things are specific to what degree you're getting into. Like the Teach Grant is for people who are going to be in the education, related things, who are going to be, teaching at certain types of schools, things like that. You also have to, these all require FAFSA. There's not a separate application for each one. You do the FAFSA application, you're applying for all of these. Federal Pell Grant and Federal Supplemental Opportunity Grant are both, as the name implies, federal grant money. Ohio College Opportunity Grant, again, kind of how the name is set up there, you have to be an Ohio resident. And the thing that these all have in common is they're all based off of your FAFSA information, and they all require, a certain amount of financial need as determined by FAFSA. And we'll talk about that more in detail here. Some things to be aware of with federal work study. This is something that you will oftentimes see on an award offer. If you're eligible for it, you do have to be eligible for it based off of your FAFSA information. But just like I said before, this is not a grant money. So this is not like a Pell Grant where you're just getting it for going to school. It would be dependent upon you getting a job with, within a university or within qualifying job, it's kind of set up through the university. So again, at UC, we have a website that lists all of our student employment opportunities. A good chunk of those require you to be federal work study eligible. And, those you would be earning biweekly paycheck, and it's very much like a traditional job. You'd be doing an interview, an application process. There are also opportunities with, local schools or federal, state, or other public agencies, and even certain nonprofits and for-profit organizations. Most schools are going to have a central processing way of posting those. And as you might guess at this point, most are going to do that online, just like we do. So, again, just some words about the Federal Work Study Program. It's very good. It's very useful. It's something that if you talk to a lot of my colleagues in the financial aid office, many of us, and myself included, got our start in financial aid or in higher education through a federal work study job. So, many, many years ago now, longer than I'd like to think it is, I was a student employee for financial aid office at the school I went to. And so even if you're not necessarily looking to make a career out of it, it certainly can be useful in helping you cover the cost of college. Scholarships. So this is something that, everyone is always the most excited about, scholarships and grants. And again, we kind of divide things up here. There's two major types of scholarships: institutional scholarships and private scholarships. So institutional means from a university. So the University of Cincinnati, we have our own institutional scholarships, as you might guess, but there's lots of private organizations that offer scholarships. Most scholarships are going to be merit-based, strictly speaking. So they're looking at ACT, SAT scores or high school GPA, things like that. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about UC, but again, we want this information to be useful for regardless of what your plans are. So each university or college has their own awarding criteria, and sometimes they may take in your financial situation as well with it. It might be a combination of the two, but generally speaking, it's going to be a merit-based off of a student's academic performance, and it's something that you want to be aware of deadlines for universities that you're interested in. And you also want to start looking for private scholarships. And this is something that I really wasn't that much aware of myself when I went to school, but it's probably also a lot easier to do it at this point. But you can start looking for private scholarships earlier. Even if you're a student or a parent of a student who's not a senior this year, you can kind of start looking for these now and get an idea of what you want to apply for, when you're getting into your senior year. So a couple other things with that is, scholarships are usually, particularly private scholarships, are going to be essay based. And so, you want to make sure you're working on that. But you'll find that a lot of private scholarships will have a similar kind of, 500 words or 1,000 words. They want information about yourself or your academic experiences, things like that. One of my biggest suggestions with these is to look for ones that are unique. I've been in financial aid a long time. Sometimes private organizations will want schools to post their private scholarships on our website. We do that at UC. We've got a search engine tool to help people with that even. And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second more. But they can be very specific. And I remember finding one once that had contacted us at UC, and they were specific to students who were children or grandchildren of farmers from 2 specific counties in Pennsylvania. And they were looking for academically prepared students, but you had to meet those living requirements to be considered for it. And so, when there are smaller, when there's a more specific thing that they're looking for, it's easier to stand out with that. So check those early and often. So UC scholarships, just a brief overview. We offer institutional scholarships. We are strictly merit for our scholarships. The Cincinnati Scholarship is our, kind of our premier or flagship scholarship program. It ranges from $1,500 up to full tuition room and board and a book allowance. And, there are amounts between those two extremes. So, at UC, it's kind of like a pyramid, if it makes sense. The smallest amount, the $1,500, is offered to the most number of students. As you get to bigger and bigger dollar amounts, you're getting, smaller and smaller offers, tighter and tighter, higher requirements on that. There are also departmental scholarships. So the Cincinnati program is available for any student who's applying to the University of Cincinnati as a freshman. There are also scholarships that are tied to certain academic programs. And so this is not an all-encompassing list, but things like the engineering program at UC, the business, the DAP program, there are others, but they have scholarships specifically for those students housed within those programs. To be considered for scholarships at UC, our deadline is December 1st to apply for admission. We don't have a separate application for scholarships. So if you're a senior this year, or if you're a parent of a senior this year, this coming December 1st is the deadline to complete the admissions application in full. And that means having the high school transcript sent, at UC by that date. It also means if you're applying for a program that requires a ACT or SAT score, you have to have those there. And I know a lot of our program, or a large number of them, have no longer require that for admission. But if they do, then it has to be there to be considered for scholarships. So with that, again, December 1st is very important. And that sets up how, for you to be reviewed for scholarships at UC. Some very useful scholarship search tools. So this would be for private scholarships. There's a number of different websites there. Fastweb.com is a very, common one. Scholarship America. There's a Cincinnati Scholarship Foundation.org. And there's a number of others there all listed. All good places to check. These are places that are not necessarily scholarships of their own, but they are weeding out and a compendium of scholarships, if you will. I hinted at this before on our financial aid website, financialaid.uc.edu. There's a link for searching for scholarships where students can go, and this is you don't have to be a current student for this. This is available for anyone, regardless of whether you're UC or not, whether you're admitted or not. That's all I'm going to find. This is a list of private scholarships. Some other good resources are, as you might guess, libraries will oftentimes keep local scholarship information on file available for people. High school counselors, just like Mark here. I don't know if you guys do or not, but I know oftentimes high schools will try to keep local or alumni scholarship information available. Organizations, churches, things like that. Big things to be in mind with this is, you really want to steer clear of anything that's wanting money to apply for. Generally speaking, even if they aren't scams outright, they're just not worth your time, or they're providing you information you could get for free anyway. So for me, anything that's asking for money is a big red flag. There's a lot of free resources out there. So I would focus on those, and kind of let anything that's asking for money to go aside. Other things to check with is, parents, your places of business. So be sure that you're checking with those. Oftentimes they have things available for you guys. So make sure you're utilizing that. And sometimes there's not a lot of people applying for those because people aren't aware of it. So, definitely want to check with your employers to see if they offer anything for yourself or your children. 2 federal loans, and federal loans is everyone's least favorite thing, I know, but it is very useful information, and I want you guys to have an understanding of what this is. This is going to be, generally speaking, something offered and available for you. And so federal loans are all fixed interest rate loans. Students are potentially eligible for subsidized loan money, at the very least unsubsidized loan money, and I'll go into amounts here. I think it's the next slide, but we'll hold off that in just 1 second here. You do have to be enrolled at least 6 credit hours to be eligible for federal loan money, and it doesn't require payments until 6 months after you graduate, or if you drop below part-time enrollment for 6 months. The Federal Direct Parent Plus loan money is a loan that's offered to the parent, and this causes a lot of confusion for people when they see this. This is not a loan that you're co-signing for a student. This is a loan in the parent's name that can be taken out by the parent for the student. And repayment for that begins 60 days after it's dispersed, unless you choose to defer it. And that, that's something that you can do when you're requesting the loan. It's done through a federal website. That you have to do some extra steps for this. But if you do that, then again, while a student's enrolled at least 6 credit hours part-time, payments are not required. Interest rates are fixed, and again, regardless of your income, even if you don't think you're eligible for anything else, there is no income cutoff for federal loans. So this will be available for you. If you're planning to use that, you still want to do a FAFSA. So we can hit to the next slide there, Sarah. These are some federal loan limits, just kind of let you know what to expect. We do have, this is broken up between dependent at the top, independent at the bottom. There's graduate and law students at the bottom. I'm going to assume, probably all of you don't really need to worry about anything but the dependent limits. So a student, as a freshman student, regardless of school, things like that, the maximum in federal loans that you can get in the subsidized or unsubsidized loan program is $5,500, $5,500. As a sophomore, at $6,500, juniors and seniors get $7,500. Depending on your FAFSA information, you can be eligible for some of that in subsidized loan money. You can see the maximums there listed. But even if you're not eligible for anything in subsidized, you'll at least have $7,500 as a senior, let's say, in unsubsidized loan money, or $5,500 if you're a freshman. And again, there's some information there if you're a non-traditional student or an adult student or a graduate student. That doesn't really apply for anyone here today. We can go ahead and knock on to the next slide there. All federal loans have a fixed interest rate, and this can be a little bit confusing because what I'm about to say is going to sound completely like I'm contradicting myself with that. It is a fixed interest rate for the year they were dispersed. And what that basically means is if you're a freshman student and you've taken out your $5,500 in federal loans, then the interest rate for that year is fixed for an amount. And right now it's about 3.25%. And if you were a freshman right now. And so if you take out a loan your second year, the government reevaluates it. I won't get into the details on how this is calculated, but it could be different the second year. It doesn't mean it's changing the interest rate on your first $5,500. It just means when you get your next $6,500, the interest rate for that $6,500 could be different. So potentially, if you took a loan out each year for 4 years, each disbursement of all 4 years could have a slightly different interest rate, and all of those remain the same for the life of the loan repayment. And same thing with the Parent Plus loan. The other thing to be aware of is there are loan origination fees. And so again, this is the amount that it currently is. For undergraduate students, it's 1.059. For Parent Plus loans, it's 4.236. And that is taken out of the loan before it gets to the university. And so most universities, websites, when you get award notices, they'll talk about this. But if you took out a $2,000 loan as a student, again, if this is the current year's amount, this is not next year's, we don't know what that is yet, but it would be 1.059% less than the amount you accept. We can hit the next slide, sir. So general federal student aid eligibility criteria. So this is what you have to meet to be eligible to complete a FAFSA and receive financial aid. So you have to have a high school diploma, or a GED or certificate, or have completed the high school education in a homeschool setting that you meet the state that you live in requirements. So that can be different from state by state, but if you meet the state requirements to be considered to have a high school diploma through homeschool education, that works the same way as a GED or a high school diploma. You do need to have one of those to be able to do a FAFSA. You need to be enrolled and accepted in an eligible degree seeking program or certificate program. Generally speaking, any, like UC or public universities, or colleges, the vast majority of the programs they're offering are going to be degree seeking, aid eligible programs. At UC, we've got some certificate programs, which are, short-term programs that there's some that are not aid eligible. But if you're in a traditional 4-year program, you should be fine with that. You have to be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, generally speaking, like a permanent resident. That kind of makes sense to most people. You need to have a valid social security number. Again, you're probably not telling you anything you're surprised by. And, if you're going to be a freshman for next fall, you want to do the 2022-23 FAFSA. And we can hit the next slide today. Excellent. So FAFSA, I'm talking about the aid first. Here's how you kind of get all of that. Here, you're applying for all of that through FAFSA, this one application. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid, or FAFSA. Like I said before, you want to complete it online or use, one of the apps on your phone of choice. It is completely free. So if you happen to get to the wrong website or something like that, there are places that will charge you money and ask for information. And it's not that they're not legitimate and that they won't fill a FAFSA for you. It's just not any easier to do that. So, if you're somewhere and they're asking for a credit card, you're at the wrong spot. So you want to get to studentaid.gov, and you will be able to complete a FAFSA there. There is no charge with that. Just as I said before, I should also mention again, if you're a senior this year, and I know it feels like it's probably a while away, but you can actually do your FAFSA starting this October 1st. So just like a couple of days here, Friday, I think. And you'll be able to do the FAFSA, for the 2022-23 academic year, October 1st. Like I said before, most scholarships don't require FAFSA, but some grant money is a first come, first served basis. So a lot of the things I had before there, like the Pell Grant, that is not first come, first served. It's just a matter of, are you eligible for it? The Federal Supplemental Opportunity Grant, that is, are you eligible for it? And did you apply when it was still available? So Particularly your first year, we suggest completing it as soon as possible. Within the first week or two of October, it's always safe. You'll see them sometimes where they've been completed, 1 o'clock in the morning on October 1st. Someone was really wanting to make sure they were first in line. Probably don't need to be quite that persnickety on it, but it is available October 1st. We suggest doing it as soon as you can after that. You will also want to check with schools. Some will have priority deadlines for their own institutional, grant money or things like that. So college A may say, if you have your FAFSA completed by November 1st, that, if you're eligible for their grant money, that they guarantee it'll be available, things like that. So again, the sooner you get it done, the better. And we can hit the next slide, sir. Something that you're going to need to create is something called the Federal Student Aid ID, the FSA ID. And if some of you remember this for yourselves, or maybe have older kids, there used to be something called the PIN number. It's kind of like that. That was done away with some years ago. The federal government thought it was too confusing people were always confused what was the PIN. They never remembered what it was next year. So they decided that instead of just calling it a username and ID, that they called it the Federal Student Aid ID. And it serves as your login information, and it also serves as your electronic signature. And you can create that prior to October 1st. So there's a lot of security features with that because, again, this is all of your sensitive information. So the federal government has a lot of security features, which is good, but it can take a couple minutes to get set up. So generally speaking, if you've got an evening free, a student and parent, because you're each going to have your own unique one, I would highly suggest you go ahead, hop on to the website. You can create your FSA ID, and that way you're ready to go come October 1st. You don't have to worry about creating that. You can just do the FAFSA application. Now we can hit the next slide, sir. And like I just said, this is unique to you. It's your signature, your electronic signature for everything. So important is student and parents. You each are going to have your own unique one. So only one parent needs to create it if it's if parents are married. But a parent would need one, a student will need one. It can't use duplicate cell phone number or email address. It won't let two users have the same email account. It has to be unique email for each one. Something else we suggest is if you're, students, if you have a high school email address, it's not that you can't necessarily use it, but if you're going to lose access to that after you graduate, you don't want to use that for this, because shortly after, you're going to get through your senior year here real quick, and next year you need to do new FAFSA. So if you've forgotten your login, they're going to send just like every other website in the world, there's I forgot my email that they'll send to you, and you can reset stuff. If that's going to a high school email account that no longer exists, it's going to be a little bit more complicated for you to get back access to that. So make sure you're using an email address that you have access to that's not going to be gone. And so it's very useful. And, again, there's some different stuff on here, but it's used to log into all kinds of different things, both FAFSA, and if you utilize student loans, there's another federal system that you will get in, and you're going to use this as well. And we can go ahead and hit the next slide, Sarah. It's going to use information that you might discuss, and bear with me while I take a drink from my giant flower cup. So you need your name, your social security number, your date of birth, a cell phone number, and email address. And again, you can only use one email to one account. Make sure you're using your full legal name. I've helped literally thousands of people fill out a FAFSA, and a lot of people forget that they may go by Teddy, but their name is Theodore. And when you're doing this, you need to make sure you're using Theodore, or it will not work, because it is checking with federal systems when you're setting this up. So you need to have your full legal name for all this. It will not work correctly if you're not using that. And so again, parents, when you're doing your FAFSA information, you're going to need tax information for student and parent. One of the nice things with this is when you're doing the FAFSA, you can download tax information now. And I think we've got a slide on that a little bit later, so I won't get too far ahead of myself. But, we're going to be looking, if you're going to be a senior for next year, we're going to want the 2020 tax information, which would be 2 years old at that point. And again, you log in, biographical information for student, parent, and tax information, and that's about 98% of the FAFSA. We can go ahead and hit this next slide, sir. So as I mentioned this before, there you can do a FAFSA online on a desktop, just kind of the traditional way. There's an app that you can get for Android and iPhone. You can do a paper application if you really want to gouge out your eyes from frustration, but you've got a lot of options with this. So, any of them is fine. There's not necessarily a better one. Because I'm used to it, I tend to gravitate towards the desktop, but that doesn't mean you can't use the phone application. It will work just as well. And we can go to that. Thank you, sir. Couple things for the mobile app. So you can get it on the website there. We've got it listed. And it's one of the nice things with all this, and this is just kind of telling you the various things you can do it with, and you can do with tablets and everything. It's fairly user-friendly. When they first came out with this a couple of years back, it was interesting. It kept crashing for a week or so because everyone was trying to use it at the same time. But they have really done a lot of work on this, and it works quite well, and it steps you through everything. Students can complete their portion, and then they can send an email prompt to a parent and vice versa to complete the other sections of stuff. So you can do this on pretty much any device at this point. So don't let if you only have a phone or if you only have a tablet, you don't have a computer, not a problem. You can do it on that. We can hit a next slide there. This is what it's going to look like on the landing page on a mobile device, just kind of so you can kind of see what that looks like and make sure you're at the right spot. We can kind of hit on from this. FAFSA on the web, again, it's going to look like this. It's going to prompt you to log in. If you're a first-time user, it's going to prompt you to create your your FSA ID, and have a parent create the FSA ID. If you've already created those earlier, then you would be a returning user, and you can complete your information and move on. There, you can go to the next slide. Some common mistakes that people will do. So you can still fill out last year's FAFSA, or I should say current year's FAFSA, the 21-22 FAFSA. So if you get on there, let's say, I don't know, tomorrow, because you're wanting to get it early, done early, good for you, but you can't do the one you need to do. So these are all year specific. So again, if you're a senior this year, you're going to want to do the 2022-23. And next year, you're going to want to do the 23-24, and so on and so forth. So make sure you're doing the correct year. This is a common thing. People will contact us for incoming freshmen, say, hey, do you have my FAFSA information? And we'll look and yeah, we don't have the end file for you. And, we'll kind of talk it through, and we'll come to find out, you were trying to get done the right thing, but you did the wrong year. So go back in and do the correct one. So again, just make sure you're getting the right year done. Again, make sure you're using your full legal name. There will be issues if you don't use that. It is going through various federal systems to make sure everything is matching. It's like Social Security Administration, things like that. Again, make sure you know the deadlines for stuff. It's available October 1st. Try to get it done within the first week, and you should be good for the vast majority of things, if not everything. Make sure you're being careful with this. And, we see this all the time in that someone accidentally, I know for a lot of high school students, I was the same way. I had probably used my Social Security number like 2 times prior to completing a FAFSA, so it's not like I knew it off the top of my head. So make sure that if it's not something that you know by heart, that you are putting it in correctly. Double check that, because again, it'll cause issues with stuff. And we're going to talk about if you've got a situation where parents are divorced or separated like that, which parent to use, but make sure you're using the correct parent information. Make sure you're, answering household size, things like that. And we're going to go through a lot of these, and a couple of these in more detail. But whenever you're doing the FAFSA, regardless of whether it's the desktop or on an Android device or iPhone, you will, when you click on the answer box, it will give you more details about that. So if it asks you for the number in household that you have, and you're not sure who to include, if you click on the answer box, it will tell you much more detail of what they're looking for, and it should hopefully reduce a lot of confusion for you. We can go ahead and hit the next slide, Sarah. We get this question a lot on, do I need to provide my parents' information or not? So FAFSA considers people either to be dependent, meaning they need parent information, or independent, meaning it's just the student or student spouse information if the student's married. So to be eligible for being an independent student, you have to be able to answer yes to one of these questions. So it ultimately goes off of date of birth, but in essence, 24 years of age or older. Are you married? Do you have your own legal dependents? Are you legally emancipated minor? Not meaning you're 18 or older, but that you've actually gone to court and were legally emancipated. Are you in a graduate student program? Are you considered a member of the armed forces or a veteran of the armed forces? Were you an orphan or ward of the court? Were you in legal guardianship? Are you at homelessness or risk of homelessness or unaccompanied youth? And a couple of those can be a little bit tricky. Again, it's the same thing as I was saying before. If you're not entirely sure what they're meaning by that, when you click on the box for that, when it opens, it's going to give you details on what their definition for that is. So if you can answer yes to one of these questions, you'd be considered independent. My guess is probably everyone I'm talking to here, and normally this is the case when I go to schools, is that most students, the vast majority of students, are going to need to provide parent information on the FAFSA. And there's not a way around that. So we can go ahead and hit the next slide. So it is possible you might have special circumstances for something. And so, if both parents are incarcerated, if a student has left home because of an abusive environment, things like that, they may not, there's some other things there. They may not have, the FAFSA will still want to request information. Schools can do a dependency appeal, it's called, but this is something that is done only in relatively extreme cases. Just because a student is financially self-supporting does not meet a requirement for this. So there has to be something, generally speaking, pretty terrible going on. A brokenness of the relationship, abusive relationship, that a school could do this. But if you are in a situation like that, please reach out to your, the school or schools that you're interested in for more guidance on this. We can hit the next slide. This is also something that comes up a lot, especially when we are in person doing a FAFSA night where we're helping people fill out a FAFSA. Parents might be divorced or separated, maybe they were never married, and people are just not sure, what parent am I supposed, is it both parents? If they're divorced, is it just one? How do I know which one? So generally speaking, married, biological parents, or not married, but both parents, both biological parents are living together, you want to put both parents on the FAFSA. Both parents' information and income would be included. For divorced parents, it's going to go with which parent the student lived with the most the previous 12 months. If there's a 50-50 residency on that, so a student is spending equal amount of time with each, then it's going to go to to the parent who provided the most financial support in the previous 12 months. So it goes in that order. So it's not either or. It's first, regardless of financial support, who did the student live with the most? If that is 50-50, then it goes to who provided the most financial support. So if that parent is then remarried, it's going to be that parent and step parent. And so if it's a situation where a student has been adoptive, so this is not, a student living with someone or living with grandparents, but if they have been adopted by someone, then those parents are considered legal parents, and then the adoptive parents would complete the parent section of the FAFSA. Other people it's going to include, it's going to be, this gets a little bit into the weeds, but I'm going to assume most of you are going to be considered dependent students. So it's going to be siblings that that are at home, that are under the age of 24. It's going to be if your parents are supporting people more than 50% of their financial support, and they are also living in your parents' home, they would also be considered part of your household. And then part of that, the FAFSA will also ask of those people, how many will be in college. So if you have a sibling who's also going to school at the same time, then you'd want to put 2 for that. I had a pair, it was a 4 quintuplets, and They were all going to school at the same time, so it was a household of 6, and 4 of them were in school. And I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds like so much to do all at one time. But make sure you're answering that question correctly as well. So again, when you're doing the FAFSA, when you click on the answer box, it's going to go through and give you details on what they're expecting, to include with that. We can go ahead and hit the next slide. Another common mistake that people make is investments on FAFSA. And so sometimes people get really worried. They don't want to, they're trying to be as honest as they can up front, and they don't want to falsify anything. And I applaud you for that. But there are certain types of investments are included on the FAFSA. Certain types of investments are excluded. So, it's looking for both student and parent information. So there's a question about, cash, savings, and checking accounts, and that's simple enough. It's just whatever the dollar amount would be in those when you complete the FAFSA. Investments include real estate, but not your primary home. So if you just have one home, that's the home you're living in, it's not considered an investment. You don't need to worry about what that home is valued. It doesn't come into play for FAFSA. If you do have like rental properties or trust funds, money market accounts, things like that, stocks, bonds, et cetera, those are considered an investment. If you have a 529 tuition plan, prepaid or savings account, prepaid plan, that is also considered an investment on the FAFSA. And we can go ahead and hit the next slide. That's going to go with what not to include. So again, the home you live in is not considered an investment on the FAFSA. The value of a life insurance policy or retirement plan, so like a 401k or a pension fund, even if you have stocks, bonds in those, if it's in that kind of fund, it is excluded from the FAFSA. And I see this mistake made all the time. People will put the value of their pension or their 401k, and it can hurt them, on the eligibility, or hurt their students on the eligibility. So make sure you are answering these questions correctly, because FAFSA does not consider this as part of your investments for FAFSA purposes. UGMA and UTMA accounts, for which you're the custodian but not the owner, that doesn't really come up all that much. If it's a family farm that you live and operate on, the income you earn from that would be, because it's taxable, but the family farm itself would not necessarily have anything. The 529 plans, this can get a little bit tricky depending on who it belongs to. So for 529 plans that are in a student or parent name, it's going to need to be included on the FAFSA, and it's giving details here. And then this is a very common question that we get, grandparent or aunt or uncle, or a close family friend, maybe. Normally it's a grandparent or uncle or aunt, but they've created a savings account and it's for all of the grandkids. Let's say it's they've got all their different grandkids. It's not just one specific grandkid. So people will ask, well, how do I report that in FAFSA? Does it affect things? And so in those situations, if it's not in the student's or the parent's name, then you're not going to include that in the investments question. However, what will happen with that? So let's say grandparents give $5,000 to you, which very generous, from their 529 plan. They've got that set up for all 4 each 4 years. Then what will happen is when you do your FAFSA for the next year. So again, I'm going to just assume for a second, if you're a senior this year, you're doing your FAFSA, grandparents has a 529 plan, wouldn't come into play at all on this FAFSA. Next year's FAFSA that you can do 1 year from October 1st of next year, there's a question about other untaxed income. So if you got $5,000 from a family member like that, from a 529 plan from another family member, you would be putting that amount in the untaxed income section there. So it wouldn't come into play until your second year. So again, just be aware of that. You don't want to add money that you don't have to count on here. We can go ahead and hit the next slide. As I mentioned before, again, if you're starting next year, the FAFSA is going to use 2020 tax information. That's going to be a big portion of calculating what type of financial aid you're eligible for. And, pandemic's still happening, and the job market has been crazy. It's been up, it's been down, it's been all around. And, some people have had a return to normal, some people have not. If you've had something happen, this might be loss of job, or, got a loss of job and then have a job that's paying less, maybe. That's unfortunately the reality for a lot of people. There could be other things, medical expenses. So maybe you had a large medical issue over the year. It doesn't have to be COVID related, but whatever it might be. And there's a number of other things. But if you feel like the financial information that's being, provided on the FAFSA is not indicative of your current situation, schools can do something called a special circumstance appeal. And it allows us to update FAFSA information within certain guidelines to better reflect your current situation. So this is done school by school. So, if you have chosen UC, if you were going to UC and you wanted to do this, if you had a change, maybe loss of income, you would want to contact us, the financial aid office at UC, and, we would walk you through that process of what to do. If you're going somewhere else, or maybe if you're still deciding on schools, once you have the FAFSA done, you can start reaching out to places and asking them their process for this, because it is going to be a school by school situation. Once that determination has been made by the school, it can't be appealed again. It's kind of where it stops. And two schools may have two different outcomes, and that's under federal regulations. That's fine. And I know that seems weird, but it is a school by school situation. So just be aware of that, particularly with everything crazy going on right now. We can hit the next slide. One fantastic thing, which I would have loved had it been somehow magically in existence many years ago when I did a paper FAFSA for myself, my first year, is something called the IRS data retrieval tool. So when you get to the tax section, so when you go into the FAFSA, it's going to kind of ask for that biographical information for student and parent, and then you move on into tax questions. You can, of course, if you have your taxes available, you can answer all those questions, and it will walk you through quite nicely, for everything. But to save yourself some time and perhaps worry or headache with that, you can it'll give you the option that's called the IRS data retrieval tool, and it will take you to a special section of the FAFSA to confirm your identity for the IRS. And it's going to let you download your tax information from 2020 directly from the IRS to the FAFSA. And what's fantastic with that is it's not like it's just going to pull it up. It's going to answer the questions for you. So the vast majority of income information is tax related on the FAFSA. And so this lets you basically just do a couple things and you're done. When you're doing this, it'll ask for the address that you use to complete your FAFSA with. So make sure that you're typing it in exactly as it was on your tax return. Make sure everything's matching up, and it should recognize your information. And we can go ahead and next slide there. Some things to keep in mind. So when you get done, you're going to get, it'll say congratulations, and your FAFSA is complete there. We've got a screenshot there of a photo one. It will let you know what's done. It will give you confirmation number. You can certainly print that or write that out. I've never actually needed that, but it is available if you can use that for certain things. It will provide what's called the expected family contribution number, which we're going to talk about in just a second, but that's the number that is set that determines your grant eligibility. It'll give you an estimation for federal Pell Grant and direct loan estimation. And so, it lets you do, some other stuff too for parents with multiple students in school. But it'll give you an estimation of stuff. So make sure you go all the way until you get to the congratulations page. That means you've got it done. We can hit the next slide. If you need help, there is a great website called FAFSAHelpOhio.org. So FAFSAHelpOH.org. They have a lot of really useful information and video how-tos that kind of walk you through the process, and they'll show you screenshots and, clips of them actually doing things on what the page will look like. And it'll, have a FAQ section there, to give you more details. So if you're nervous about it, and I am a nervous person when I do federal paperwork, which is kind of funny considering my job. But this should help you feel a little bit more ease and kind of get a peek at what to expect with everything. And we can hit the next slide there, sir. Something else you can do. So maybe you're a junior or you're a parent of a junior, and you can't do it FAFSA yet. It'll be next year, but you want to kind of see what to expect. So there's something called FAFSA Forecaster. And we've got the website there. I'm not going to read that out because it is long. But FAFSA Forecaster is basically a faux FAFSA application for someone who doesn't actually want to do or can't do a FAFSA yet. So it'll ask almost all the same information. It's then going to spit out that expected family contribution number, a Pell Grant estimation for you. And so it's kind of a nice way to just get an idea of what to expect with stuff. So, again, feel free to utilize that. I mean, anyone could do it. It doesn't have to be a junior or someone even in high school, but, obviously that's probably the people who are going to be most interested in that. We can go ahead and hit the next screen. So I've said it a couple times, but expected family contribution, this can be a little confusing for people. It is not necessarily going to be the number that school is going to cost you. It is more of a measure of a family's financial fitness, or a student and parents' financial fitness. And so a lot of the grant money I've talked about, there is literally graphs, and it will tell you, and we work with this all the time, if an EFC or expected family contribution falls within this number, this number range, then you get X amount of dollars in that program. So you could have a 0 EFC and still potentially have a bill to university, depending on other financial factors and financial aid eligibility requirements. You could have 100,000 EFC. It doesn't mean your bill is going to be 100,000. It is a number that is, again, a financial fitness number, if you will, and also it allows schools to know what you're eligible for various grant programs. We can hit the next slide, sir. So something that's going to be created for you is something called the cost of attendance. And when you start getting awards letters from schools, you're going to see this. It can be confusing and sometimes terrifying. I've talked to some people who are really concerned about this over the years. And it's not something that should be terrifying. It's information for you. It's supposed to help you understand the cost of a school and help you be able to compare schools. So it comprises of 2 big categories: direct costs, things like tuition, fees, housing, meal plan, and indirect costs like books, supplies, transportation, miscellaneous costs, personal expenses, et cetera, et cetera. So schools have to create this in certain within guidelines created by the Department of Education, but it is our total estimation for a student to exist. So if they had absolutely nothing and we're going to start school with just the pair of clothes they've got on themselves and nothing else, this would be our estimation for a year at the school. So when you see this, not all this may apply to you. So, again, if you're going to a local school, and I'm plugging UC here, if you're going to UC and you're not living on, in the dorms, the housing cost is, not necessarily going to be applicable to you, because if you live with mom, dad, you're not having additional costs for that. It's just what was already happening. If you're not using a meal plan, again, the only billed cost for you may be tuition and fees. But sometimes people will see that cost of attendance and think, oh, this school cost, X a dollar amount. I thought the tuition was only, Y dollar amount. So that's, again, schools try to provide a lot of information. When we're giving this information out, we are required to make this available for families, but that's what it means. So if you see it, again, it's not necessarily the bill. It is comprising our direct costs, our indirect costs, and even those direct costs may not all be applicable to you depending on your choices with stuff. And we can hit the next slide, Sarah. Something else that you'll see is financial need, or unmet financial needs. So the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution is what your financial need is. So if you see that term in an award letter, again, it's something that schools are going to make available. It doesn't mean that your bill is going to be what the financial aid need is. And again, that's something that's a common misconception with people. It completely means we have our cost of attendance. We know what the expected family contribution is from FAFSA. So, if the cost of attendance was $25,000 and the expected family contribution was $5,000, then your financial need would be called $20,000. So again, just be aware of what that is. This is for your information so that you don't see a term that just means nothing to you, that's what it will mean to a lot of people if it's their first time in. And we can go ahead and hit the next slide. So this is just kind of averages, right? So we've kind of got some, 4 different schools here. And averages for tuition fees, we've got a community college, a public four-year university, and a private four-year university. So as you can see, for a community college, generally speaking, they don't have dorm options at community colleges. That's not how they're set up for stuff. So you're just going to have tuition and fees. So we've got an estimation. Again, these are kind of averages. You might have $6,000 for tuition fees at a two-year school, community college. A four-year public university, a good average $12,200 for in-state resident. You might, there would be additional costs for room and board. Again, we've got an average there, $12,500. So, a total cost, not counting any financial aid, for a public four-year university might be $24,700 if you're living on campus, if you've got a meal plan, etc. We've got the same kind of setup for a private four-year university. Again, tuition fees, room and board. Again, these are looking at some averages on stuff. You might have $45,586. So normally you're going to see on a awards letter, they're going to provide you estimations for things like this, with their estimates of bills. And then they're going to have your financial aid, and that might be, loans, scholarships, grants, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going to want to compare those and see, what is this covering? So, hopefully this will help you kind of read those financial aid award letters better and understand what they ultimately mean. We can hit the next slide there. So some things to consider that can affect those bills. So, tuition guarantee. This is something that I'll pause and talk about UC for a second. UC has a tuition guarantee, and what that means is, as a freshman, you're going to have a specific dollar amount for, tuition, fees, etc. And that is not going to change for the life of your program. So if you're in a 4-year program or a 5-year program, we have 4 or 5-year programs depending on different stuff. If you complete it in that time frame, your tuition will not change. Like I said, I've worked at other universities, and when I was in school myself, most places you can kind of anticipate, and you can look at the history on this, but at the university, if you're interested in a specific one, many will have a tuition increase for over each year or every few years. So you want to be aware of that and kind of check into that and see, do they have a tuition guarantee? If they don't, what's their average, tuition increases over the years? Sometimes specific academic programs have additional costs. The next big one is residency. Obviously, in-state is the tuition is going to be cheaper than if you're a non-resident. It's going to be at a premium because there's money that schools get from the state, public universities and colleges get for their residents to go there. So when you're not going to your home state's schools, then unfortunately that doesn't follow you. So, you're going to want to make sure if you're a non-resident, what that's going to be versus a resident cost. Full-time versus part-time, co-op, students at UC, when they're in co-op, they're not being charged regular tuition costs, right? So different schools may be different, but there is a co-op fee, and I'm averaging here, it's roughly $500, but you're not paying tuition that semester. If you decide, if it's somewhere else and you're not living on campus, but you can you've got to contact housing for this, but you can put your room and meal plan on hold, basically. You're not going to get charged that for that semester. Many schools will have an overload enrollment cost. So if you're enrolled beyond 18 credit hours, they may have additional costs. Usually again, most schools, and UC is like this, 12 to 18 credit hours is a flat rate. So there's a per credit hour cost. And then once you hit 12 and you go up to 18, there's no additional fees in that time frame. Of course, housing selection, parking, and books or ebooks costs are all going to impact your costs, your direct costs and billing with the university. And we can hit the next slide. So, let's fast forward into future, a couple months here, 2-3 months, and you've got award letters. So, and you've probably got it from multiple schools. Hopefully some of the information I've just given you will give you kind of the guide to read award letters and understand what they're offering. So one of the big things is you're going to want to look and see, what is the financial aid that they're offering? What is free money like scholarship or grant money versus loan money? What is their total cost? What does it mean for me? Because sometimes more aid does not always necessarily mean cheaper or better. And you can have a school that is offering a lot of scholarship money or grant money, but because their cost is just so much more to another school, that's offering you less scholarship money, you may still have a cheaper bill at the school that's offering you less free money. It happens all the time. So make sure that when you're looking at award letters, that you know what that means for you, because $30,000 scholarship at a school that costs $75,000 doesn't mean nearly as much as a $5,000 scholarship at a school that costs $12,000. And you want to make sure that you can afford this, because it's not just year one, it's year 1, 2, 3, 4, so you want to make sure that it's a good fit for you academically, but also a good fit for you that you can go there and you can complete your degree. Because if you can only do it for 1 or 2 years, it does you absolutely no good. You've got to get the degree for it to be this, the good, useful outcome for you. So make sure you're comparing, your award letters well. We can hit the next slide. This is kind of falls into money management tips. And students and parents, if you've not had this conversation with students yet, this is the time. Students, if you've not thought about this yet, you want to start thinking about this stuff. So you're going to have the ability to borrow a lot of money. You're going to, you're also going to start getting credit card offers and all kinds of stuff. And you want to make sure that you are thinking about the long term with everything. So, the reality is a lot of people will need to utilize some loan money, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing, but you need to be aware of how much you need to borrow for the program, not just year one. You need to make sure you're keeping that to a reasonable amount, based off of what you can expect to earn with, a job post-graduation with, in the field that you're interested in, that you're wanting to go for. Always borrow less than you can. And I have seen so many people who have just borrowed all that they possibly could, even though they didn't need it. And then they really dug themselves into a hole. And I had a parent once who, I talked about the Parent Plus loan. They took all they could with that, and they really didn't need much. The student was just attending classes. She didn't live on campus. She didn't have a meal plan. So you can get a refund for that. And so they took out basically $40,000 of money beyond the actual cost of their program. And then were surprised when they had all this money that they owed at the end. They just weren't thinking about that long term. So you want to consider the long term. You want to consider those payment things. You want to have a budget. You want to start, create a budget. UC's offers a lot of, financial literacy options for students. And, I would encourage you to utilize those. That helps you, walk you through with budgeting things. We're definitely not the only place to use that. There's a lot of stuff out there for this. But you want to start creating that now and keep on track with that. Next slides, please. Another thing, and I had so many friends in school who did not do this particular thing well at all, and that's credit. So again, I mentioned this before. You're going to start either building credit or having bad credit very quickly. And so you want to make sure that you are aware of how this all works. Having a credit card is fine if you're paying it off at the end of the month or in a relatively short amount of time. But if you're not, that is problematic. If you are missing payments, that can destroy your credit, and that can hurt your ability to rent apartments. They run credit scores oftentimes. That can hurt jobs and future loans for a house or cars or anything like that. So make sure you are, again, borrowing what you need, budgeting for, be aware of what you need and what you want, and that you are not borrowing for just stuff that you like. And please utilize the financial literacy at UC, or if you're at another school. Almost all schools have programs for this. Utilize what's available for you. So preparing for college. So a couple of things here to keep in mind, just an overview of stuff. You want to make sure that you are, if you're applying for an academic program or school that requires ACT or SAT, make sure you've taken that score and that you've got it sent to go in. Make sure that you're meeting the admissions deadline for everything. I'm going to plug UC one more time here, December 1st, if you're a senior this year. Do be aware that if you think you might be eligible, which good for you because you're probably a lot smarter than me, but if you're for the National Merit Scholarship Program, you still have to take the test to be eligible for the scholarship associated with that. You can utilize the FAFSA forecaster there to, kind of get an idea of what to expect for financial aid. Make sure you're avoiding, scholarship or identity theft scams. We've got a link there for that. You want to create your FSA ID so you can complete your FAFSA. You want to start narrowing down the colleges you're considering and visiting them. So, it's going to be difficult if you want to visit 15 colleges. You might want to have your top 5, top 3 that you're going to go to and check out and look at hard. And again, take a realistic look at your financial situation. Next slide. So as a senior, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing your meeting the October 1st deadline or shortly thereafter for your FAFSA. You want to make sure you're still working hard academically all through, graduation. You want to make sure you're staying as involved as possible for after-school activities, leadership roles, etc. That looks good for admissions applications and scholarships. Again, apply for colleges, meet deadlines. Continue to look for private scholarships. That's something you don't want to give up. Even once you get into school, you want to keep looking for private scholarships and keep applying for those. And of course, you want to make sure that you can afford the college that you're interested in. So make sure that your financial aid is matching up with what you need to cover, and that it's going to be a feasible plan for you for 4 years. Make that informed decision about your student loans and what's right for you and what's right based off of your career aspirations, post-graduation. Next slide, please. A lot of this is probably kind of summing up stuff I've said here. A university's price tag, though, isn't always going to be the only deciding factor. And obviously, from everything I've said, that's important. But you want to make sure you're at a school that you're going to complete, because having 2 years done or 3 years done at a school and then just not finishing is worse than going to a slightly more expensive school, far more worse than going to a slightly more expensive school that you actually complete. So make sure that it is a good fit for you academically. And again, as I said, more aid doesn't always equal the best option. Make sure you're looking at award letters and comparing apples to apples. There's always going to be indirect costs. And so, the bill is going to be for tuition or room and board or things like that, you want to make sure you remember. And this is where the cost of attendance comes in handy, because they do give estimates for stuff for like books and miscellaneous expenses and things like that. So make sure you're budgeting for that. If you have any issues, changes in household size or financial situation from what was reported on your FAFSA, get in contact with the school's financial aid office. Again, if you're a senior this year, October 1st, you can do your FAFSA for next year, and December 1st is the deadline to, apply for UC and be considered for scholarships. And if you're looking at other schools, I encourage you definitely check with them to make sure you're meeting their deadlines too. We can hit the next slide. I think So if you have questions, and of course, I want to be here for questions, but if you have more in-depth questions or you want to talk to someone, we are happy to help in any way we can. You want to get in contact with our One-Stop Student Service Center. There's the phone number there. There's an email address. There's also, Facebook and all their fun stuff. But, you can also come in person, things like that. So if you have questions, if you don't know what something means, talk to us. We will be happy to talk to you about it. So I will pause here, and we'll get to the question side of stuff. And I'm not sure how we want to take that.
Give me just a minute, Jeremy.
Sure.
I'm going to exit out.
I'm going to take a drink from, again, my lovely flower cup while we're doing that.
Sure. I'm going to exit out and head back in the meeting here. And what I'm going to do is, I think that there's an area here where
okay, gotcha.
Where that we can actually take questions through here. Let's see. It looked like Donna has raised a hand.
Yes.
I'm thinking, Donna, if you can send a message. Oh, all right.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes,
Perfect.
Super. Thank you guys for doing this so much. I got 2 quick questions.
Sure.
The first is, can you explain the difference between a subsidized and unsubsidized student loan? And the second is, on the work-study program, I assume that, any money the student makes goes directly to pay to the school, but do they also get like a W-2 at the end of the year with taxes and all that kind of stuff?
All excellent questions. And I think it was on the slide that I think I probably didn't go in the details I should have, so I apologize about that. For the loans, subsidized loan is considered need-based, so whether or not you're eligible for it will depend on FAFSA information. And basically, it is interest-free while the student is enrolled in school, at least part-time. Unsubsidized loan is accruing interest. The student is just not required to make payments until, again, drops below part-time enrollment for 6 months, or 6 months after graduation. So there is some advantages with subsidized loan, but again, a freshman student will always have at minimum $5,500, regardless of parents' income, in unsubsidized loan money. Potentially up to $3,500 of that could be subsidized, depending on the FAFSA information. For the federal work study, so schools actually have some options with this. In my experience, a student, it could go directly to the school. It could be set up that way where the student is part of the job is agreeing that the money is going to pay tuition stuff. And again, this is my experience, and I know a lot of people in financial aid. I've worked at other universities. It's normally just a pay check, right? So it is not something, and they do get W-2s for it. It is not something that is required to go to their bill. So it's important to recognize that, in that it'll be a financial aid offer because it is considered financial aid, but it's something a student can earn, and they could use it for other things too. So they can certainly use it for school expenses, but they're going to be earning it like very similar to a traditional job.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jeremy, it looks like we have a question in regards to, do we have any information about the the CSS, and what kind of information that they might ask for?
The CSS, are you referencing and I guess I'm asking this to the person who's asking this question, is that the supplemental financial application, if I'm recalling correctly? Because most public schools don't use that, none that
Right.
I know.
I believe that is what she's referring to.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the one through College Board.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I was about 90% sure. I don't get asked this question a lot. So full disclosure, like I said, I've worked in financial aid a long time. I've never worked at a school that uses it. I know it's much more in depth, but I don't know. I don't know all the information they're going to ask for, just because I've never been in a school that's used that. I've had some colleagues who've come from schools like that before, and I know that they get down in a lot more nitty gritty of, they may be looking at, don't quote me on this, because like I said, I've not used this before. They may be looking at your 401k and pension and house value and things like that to kind of look at a more in-depth look at your financial fitness. I don't know if that's, I know they look closer. I don't know if those are the specific questions. So I guess my short answer is I don't entirely know. I'm sorry. I apologize.
But that I have heard some things as well that's similar to what you're saying, Jeremy, is that like comparative, it is going to be more like in depth.
Yeah.
Lynn, what I will look into is just trying to get you some more information about that, and that I will look to post that kind of information as well up on our counselor webpage, where that we do have the financial aid information. I will look to have some kind of link on there that will get you more information for that. Thank you for that question.
Yes, I do apologize. I didn't have more details on that for you.
That's all right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, you can add the questions to the chat if you'd like to do that. Okay. I'm not sure if you can see this question as well, Jeremy. Yep.
Yeah, read it for me, because it pops up briefly and then it goes away.
Sure. Can I apply for FAFSA for my U.S. citizen kid if that I filed last year as like a non-resident, non-U.S. parent?
Okay, great question. So it only matters for the student. So if you're a non-U.S. citizen, that's not a problem for FAFSA. So student is still eligible as long as they're a U.S. citizen or what's called an eligible non-resident, or I'm sorry, non-citizen. Like a permanent resident. There are some other there's some other intricate details. It'll kind of walk you through that on the FAFSA itself. But if it's as simple enough as your student is a U.S. citizen and you're not, that's not a problem. The only thing to keep in mind is the Parent Plus loan itself. If you're a parent and you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't take out the Parent Plus loan, unfortunately. Everything else would be the same, though.
Okay, great. Another question: Do you report child support as income on the FAFSA?
No, but there is a specific question to child support. So if you're paying it, there's a specific question on if you're paying child support. If you're receiving it, there's a specific question on if you're receiving child support, neither of which would fall under the taxable, like the tax information. There's actually separate questions for it.
All right. Let's see. We have another question. If we apply for FAFSA for the previous year, should we should we like apply after October 1st? Should we withdraw the previous application?
Gotcha. So it's not like so let's say you did it by accident or something. It doesn't hurt anything, right? So you could, I have a 6-year-old son. That's my oldest son, James. I could go do a FAFSA right now for him. It wouldn't hurt anything, right? I wouldn't do anything, but it wouldn't hurt anything. And so, you know, if you've got one done in the previous year, it'll actually just prompt you to renew it. So it'll pull some information in for you. But you don't have to like get rid of an old one. You're doing a new one basically for next year.
Okay. All right. Another question. What if the child doesn't have a social security number?
Good question. So again, you have to be, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you have to be an eligible non-citizen. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say. The FAFSA will go through the details on, you know, so if you're a permanent resident, that's where a lot of people fall under. If they're not a U.S. citizen, but a permanent resident, you can do a FAFSA. And I'm going to apologize. It's been a minute since I've had this question. The FAFSA will actually walk you through this. It's either all zeros or all ones. So when you get to the question about social security number, it will prompt you with that question, you know, with that answer, or, you know, to put that information in. But if your student is like a DACA student or doesn't fall into an eligible non-citizen status, you're not technically eligible for FAFSA in that situation.
All right, still looking through. Okay, just like a follow-up with the social security number question.
I saw that pop up. Yeah. So
okay, not DACA, but
yeah. So again, when you're doing the FAFSA, one of the very early things it's going to ask is, are you a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen? And it'll even go through the eligible non-citizens include X, Y, Z, you know, Q, what, you know, all the various sections there. So you hit that button basically. And then it will, when you get to the section where it's asking about a social security number, again, click on, and I'm blanking on if it's zeros or ones, and I apologize. I know it's one of the two, but click on the answer box where you put the social in, and it will specifically tell you if you fall into this category, put zeros or ones, whichever the answer is, it'll tell you on the FAFSA itself. And I see that where that just popped up. It'll be one of the first questions. It'll literally ask, are you a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen? There'll be a box that you check, basically.
okay, we have time for a few more questions.
Oh, National Merit Time. Mark, would you? We're all
the PSAT.
Yeah, I'm far enough away from that. I mean, I know we do awarding stuff with it, and I apologize. I'm kind of far away from when that's actually like the time frames for it on the doing side of it.
Sure, the PSAT for us is going to be, students will take that on October 13th. That's going to be a Wednesday in a few weeks.
I still remember sweating through that as a kid. Great question. So I saw that one pop up and I'm good. So does Social Security income for children count as income? So the short answer is only if it's taxed. And this is the same way for parents. So if it's social, and the FAFSA will walk you through this too. You know, again, it's one of the wonderful things about the online stuff. When you're not sure about something, click on the answer box. It's going to tell you so much information on yes, include this, no, exclude this. But for Social Security income, and for a lot of people, and usually for for kids, it's not taxable, but there are some thresholds. If you're a parent who's receiving that, if you're required to file taxes on a portion of it, then it's just going to be in whatever portion is taxable is what we're counting, because we're looking at your tax return, right? Untaxed portion, there is no spot where you're going to put that on the FAFSA, right? That's just excluded information. So I saw that one too.
Sure.
So again, regardless of parents' income, a student can still get financial aid. It may only include federal loans, but there is no cap on federal loan eligibility or financial aid in general. But there are things, grant money, you're going to get to a point. There's a calculation done that creates that EFC that we talked about earlier, expected family contribution. If that is too high, you may not be eligible for any grant money. That's not going to harm your eligibility for federal loans. And also, too, like I said earlier, for scholarship money, and this is true for most schools, and I'm going to speak specifically to UC because I know the information for sure. UC, our scholarships are merit-based. So even if mom or dad were millionaires, I mean, good for you. That's fantastic. You're not going to get grant money. I can tell you that on the FAFSA right now in that situation. But your chance for scholarships are merit-based with that. So it's not going to hurt your eligibility for scholarships, and still you would be eligible for student loans if you wanted to utilize those. Anybody else?
Time for a few more questions. Okay. As I did state beforehand, that this will be up on the website in a few days, like this recording, and that we will have the slideshow as well to share to the slides, and that we will share contact information. Let's see, we have...
I saw two. One about scholarships.
Yeah, here we go.
So scholarships are, I'm going to go back to UC. Doesn't matter what your FAFSA information is. It's strictly merit-based. Are there schools out there that may utilize, merit and, income information? Yes, there are some. Majority of scholarships are strictly merit. So FAFSA or high income, it's reflected on a FAFSA, would not hurt scholarship eligibility. There's some other questions after that, but I don't remember what they are because they...
Sure. Question is, I have a junior. Is it too early to do the practice run or to apply for the ID? I'm assuming that...
no, I mean, you could
FSID.
The FSA ID, yeah. So you could certainly do that now. That's fine. You can certainly do the FAFSA forecaster that I shared there earlier. And no, I don't think it's too early. It's kind of nice because you can kind of get an idea now, because it'll give you an estimation for Pell Grant, and Pell Grant eligibility is kind of sets a lot of the other ones. So I apologize. It's time to give my kids a bath, although they're not here. Watch this. Sorry, guys. So that threw me off there.
The practice run, the FSAID.
Practice run, that's all good. Yes, that's the short answer. Thank you, Mark. Get me back on track
sure.
there. So it's not too early to do that. It'll give you a good estimation of what to expect when you get to senior status, because it's knowing early is always better, right? Because if you find out it looks like it's just going to be loans, you can at least start planning now versus a year from now. So not too early.
Not get the bath.
I like that. Yeah.
Awesome. There was a previous question that talked about, or that asked about reviewing special circumstance.
Sure.
Reviewing the changes within an income, what those special circumstances might be, or
so
maybe something just general there.
Yeah. So I'm going to make some of this just easy for myself to explain because it can be complicated. And again, if you're facing something, talk to the financial aid office. If you're planning to go to UC or wherever, talk to the financial aid office. They can give you more concrete details with your situation. But let's say, let's say your student's a senior going next year, doing the FAFSA come October 1st, based off of 2020 tax information, but you got laid off from your job in February of 2021, and your life is upside down right now. Number one, I'm sorry that that's the case for you, and I hope it gets better. But what what schools can do, and this again is a school by school process. You would be applying specifically at a school. So if you were a UC student, you would have to apply through UC specifically. We have an application process that you can apply for, we call a special circumstance appeal, and we can update your FAFSA. So, it might be as simple as saying, okay, once you get your 2021 taxes, provide us a copy of that, and we're going to change your FAFSA from 2020 tax information to 2021 tax information. And then it's going to recalculate. So it might be, if you had, let's say it was dramatic, you made $80,000 or $100,000 last year, but this year, you've got $20,000, and it's, again, it's tough. We're going to update with that, and it's going to change your eligibility for things. So it's going to recalculate the expected family contribution, and then we can see if, based off of that new information, if maybe you're eligible for Pell Grant or other things like that. Something else could be, one of the things that is common that we get is, medical bills. So, let's say something, and again, I wish this on cancer diagnosis. I see this a lot with appeals, and there's treatment, and there maybe, there's, a lot of expenses, and we can look at the costs paid out of pocket, and we can subtract that from your income coming in. And I'm doing a kind of a big picture here, but we can update the FAFSA to try to take that into consideration for things, or better reflect it. There are rules with that, because FAFSA does consider some of your income to be going towards medical expenses and living expenses. But if you have an extraordinary amount, we can look at that. So again, we're going to update information on the FAFSA. It's going to recalculate the FAFSA, and then based on that new information, we're going to see if you're eligible for additional money. So being in financial aid, I've seen lots of these that can be dramatic, and it's ultimately going to matter to the numbers. So it's not a percentage of your income. If you were making $200,000 and you're now making $100,000, obviously that's a huge percentage change, but it may ultimately not really change the financial aid, depending on some other factors. We could still update that information. We're going to recalculate it based off new income, and it's going to do whatever it does. So you want to get in contact with the financial aid offices. If you've got your top three, check with all three. You can do that appeal and see what they're going to do with it in their process. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions at this time, Jeremy.
All right. Well,
and we just, it sounds like it's almost bath time for the kids. So,
well, fortunately, they're actually, so tonight, I'm sure you're all really excited for me to share this information. My oldest son is at his Boy Scout meeting, so they're a little bit late this evening. So it kind of worked out well for me, at home here, that they're at Scout meeting, and then they'll probably won't be back for about 30 minutes. But normally right now, my duties involve bath time.
Sure. I do appreciate you, helping us tonight, and kind of, running through the process. And just like I said, I will add this up on the website along with the slides.
Fantastic.
And if families have specific questions, for me, that they can get in touch at my email, which I will put in the message here.
And you can also, Mark, you've got my information. You can get in touch with me if anyone has a question, and maybe it's not something that you want to get in contact with me directly with, but get in contact with the One Stop Center. That was the last slide there. Mm-hmm. One Stop at uc.edu. You can email questions there, and they can let you know. They can walk you through. They can answer anything really financial aid related. So if you have questions, and of course you can get to me ultimately, but that's you may just have something simple, and that's One Stop is a great place to go, because they do financial aid and billing and registration stuff too.
Sure, definitely, and and also for those families and students that might not be sure if they're applying to UC, that you still can ask these questions, and that they are available to help. So
yes,
don't think just
we're
because it's UC or right, exactly.
We're going to do the best that we can. Sometimes it might be beyond something that we could answer. It's too specific to a school, but if it's an answer, hey, how do I answer this question in the FAFSA, or X, Y, or Z problem, we're going to answer it if at all possible.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I hope this was helpful. And take care. Have a good night. I'm going to end the recording and close it down.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Jeremy.
Thank you.
Take care.